Good afternoon, friends, family, loved ones. We want to talk to you today about some of the ridiculous diet mistakes that we've made over the years. We were going to cover the diet, training, and supplement mistakes, but it turns out we've made so many ridiculous errors and followed so many awful fads over the years that actually we need to split it up into different sections. So today we're talking about the diet ones. These are a few of the fad diets and extreme protocols that we've tried that we've fallen hook, line, and sinker for. And really, at the end of each one, it slowly fell into place that we were like, my progress throughout this has been kind of linear. And the only common factor has been that I've been lifting weights and eating a bit more food each day.
And being really consistent for a long period of time.
Just being consistent, doing the basics. But no, it must be the timing of my carbs, or it must be the leucine pulsing.
As you're listening to this list, some of these things will sound insane. Like, you'll hear them and think, how could anybody possibly be convinced that that is the right thing to do? But bear in mind that at the time, these things were considered to be fact. Like, everybody in the fitness industry for a period of time, if you can remember sort of 5-10 years ago, all these things were really popular. The reason why I think it's important to go over these is you'll notice that a lot of training ideas, diet ideas are cyclical. So I wouldn't be surprised, some of these have already come back around once, but I wouldn't be surprised if these ideas start creeping back up again. And when they do, you'll have had the warning.
You'll know that's it. Kids these days have got it easy because there's been so much better synthesis of information on fitness over the last few years, and it's cut through a lot of the rubbish. But
yeah,
as Johnny says, you will see the same fads come back through. And so our goal is to make you as woke as possible to avoid all of this.
The wokest.
So to begin with, everyone's favorite is carbs. We started, so we've done no carbs and we've done all the carbs.
Yeah.
And then we've done all the carbs in the morning, we've done all the carbs in the evening. So I guess we can talk through this.
Yeah, so I think around the time we both started getting into fitness, keto was, and again, like, this is a good example, right? Because keto's now popular again, or it went through a recent phase of being very popular. But a ketogenic diet or a very low carb diet was considered for a long period of time to be the way to lose weight. Like, it was all about insulin management, and you had to keep your carbs below a certain level, and you had to keep your protein below a certain level so that you didn't bump in and out of ketosis all the time. And I think that was probably the first fat loss diet I tried that I can remember. It was just, I just cut carbs out. I think I had like 50 grams of carbs a day, and that's how I started trying to lose weight from memory.
And the justification at the time was insulin is the reason that you're fat, and everything should be directed around minimizing your insulin.
Yep.
Which is kind of like saying, like the noise that your car makes is the reason that you get from A to B. Like, yeah, like it's.
That's a great analogy. Who was it? Somebody, I think it was Eric Helms actually, who phrased this the first time for me. It was like, hormones are the consequence of weight loss, not the cause. Or like, that's the thing that's happening while these processes are taking place. It's not the thing that creates the process in the first place. So like, yes, your insulin will be lower, but it's not the reason you're losing weight or not the reason you're gaining weight.
Exactly. And this is the problem, that people love to get the hormone chat. They have to wedge in the hormone chat with diet stuff just to kind of bamboozle the people they're speaking to. And what ends up happening is you think, oh, well, it must be my growth hormone is out of whack, or it's my cortisol, or it's my insulin, and just missing the wood for the trees. Really, what doing low carb forced us to do was to make more sensible diet choices and to be consistent with tracking our calories. But instead, we attributed the progress we were making to the lack of carbs rather than to all of the other hard stuff.
Yeah. And actually, looking at this list, I think most of the stuff we did until we decided, like, oh, actually, you know what? It's just balancing the totals here. It's balancing the quantities rather than the timings and the specifics. All of them were hormone based, like either insulin or growth hormone or cortisol. There was something that we thought was causing the weight gain or the weight loss, and that was the thing we were trying to influence. But the thing about keto, as anyone who's ever tried it, you get a day, like one day in, and you've spent the entire day being very aware of the fact that you're dieting. Like, you can't get away from the fact of, like, I can't really go anywhere to eat, because not, at least back then anyway, when we were doing this in like 2010, like, you couldn't go and get a keto friendly meal at a restaurant really, unless you got steak and no chips and no sides or whatever. It was just a very painful experience the whole time. You were constantly aware of the fact you were dieting, and the amount of foods you can eat.
Well, you had to keep your carbs under 30 grams. So even incidental carbs from like broccoli, you'd be like, oh no,
Really
I've had
rack up.
9 grams of carbs today. Like, I'm really racking them up. Like, you know, you can't have certain types of mayonnaise, or certainly not ketchup or anything like that, because it would just throw your carbs way out of whack. So we did that. We then, once we thought that we saw the light, we were like, oh no, it's about having as many carbs as possible and low fat. Funnily enough, continued making progress, but we thought, no, this is the reason. This must be it.
I think you went through this phase more than me. Like, I think I stayed in the like carb phobic phase for longer, and I'd have like high carb days. So I'd do like a one high carb day in a week, and then every other day was 6 low days. But I think you experiment with some like super high carb approaches, right?
Yeah. So, well, the when you're in the low carb dungeon, your mood is low, your training quality is low, you smell, you've got the brain fog.
Your breath smells as well, doesn't it? Like, your breath smells terrible.
And then while I was in that, I was trying to get leaner, and I saw a guy on T Nation on the forums who was really lean, and I messaged him being like, oh, what's your diet? And he was like, oh, I eat really low fat. And I was like, right, that's it. How low is your fat?
I found it.
And he was like, oh, 20 grams a day. Fine. So I switched to just eating boiled lentils and like, I think
what a way to get your carbs in.
Yeah, just like white potato and protein powder and boiled prawns. And I had no seasoning or anything.
Why prawns?
I think because they're so low fat.
Oh, right, I see. It's an interesting one. Like, I would think chicken breast, but you thought no.
I think I rotated chicken breast and prawns, but it must have been because it had like 0.1 grams of fat rather than
very lean
0.6 or something.
I think meat. Go on. Sorry.
Just bags of frozen prawns. Like, really, I've got like probably the same sensation people have when they're like, oh, I can't drink Malibu anymore.
You have that about prawns.
Yeah.
Very different sort of settings where someone would serve you prawns versus serve you Malibu against your will. But yeah. While you were doing those experiments, I was involved still on my own high carb journey. But so I was still convinced that I needed 5-6 days a week of like very, very low carb. So I'd have 5-6 days of low carb and then 1 day of really high carb. And I worried so much about, well, should that day be carbs and fat? Like, can I have like whatever I want, or does the fat get stored as fat when my insulin's high? And how many carbs can I have? And can I really just have whatever? And this got to the point where there's a method that was quite well popularized at the time called skip loading, which I had days where I had 2,000 grams, like 2 kilos of carbs in, and you do just feel almost high, to be honest.
It's an unbelievable amount of carbs. Like, I think to give someone an impression who's never done this before, how many boxes of cereal is that?
Oh, well, so I would have at least a box of cereal with like honey poured into the cereal.
That doesn't even touch. That's one of your meals. Doesn't touch the sides.
You know the cinnamon bagels, the cinnamon like sweet bagels that are delicious, like bags of Haribo. But all these things sound nice, especially when you're dieting. They sound nice, and on the morning of the low carb day, they all sounded really nice. But by like 3 p.m, all I wanted was just like a bit of bacon, or just to lie down and for people to leave me alone.
Yeah.
But I did it because insulin, and because my metabolism needed to be like revived from the 6 days of what was ultimately a very moderate calorie deficit, but very low carbs.
I remember melting down sorbet and drinking that.
So
it just forces you into strange behavior, doesn't it? So that was the kind of carb journey, experimenting high and low carb. The next step was, you know what? It's not the amount of carbs; it's when you eat the carbs. That's got to be it.
That's the answer.
So John Berardi said because you're more insulin sensitive in the morning, you got to eat all your carbs early in the day. Did that
Yes.
for a while. Then we came across John Kiefer, who said, no, fat cells are also insulin sensitive in the morning, but your muscle cells are more prone to non-insulin mediated glucose transmission in the evening. So that's when you want to eat all your carbs. We were like, of course. It's the non-insulin mediated glucose transmission. So
There's an interview with us and John Kiefer on YouTube still, and might even be on our podcast still. And that interview was dressed up as like, let's get John on the podcast. But actually, Yusuf and I just were desperate to ask him some questions about the specifics of all of this and how much fat could we have after 5 p.m. Did we have to have caffeine at 5
that you
p.m.?
mentioned. When do you have can you have the carbs and the fat together? And so we were sat poring over this like, but what about fatty acid synthase and hormone sensitive lipase? Do you know what? Let's ask John Kiefer. And so you can hear the interview. It's really cringy.
Looking back, he must have thought like, you explain something like just sort of off the cuff and someone goes, well, why? And you go, oh, well, this. And you go, yeah, but why is that? Like the little naggy kid at the back of the class. Like that was what we were doing to John. He was just trying to launch his book, ultimately. We were hassling him about insulin. But yeah, that ended up with us. I got very friendly with the guy at the local Sainsbury's because they used to bake they get from frozen all their pastries in the morning. There was these like apple and raspberry turnovers that were delicious, and every evening after training I would drive past the Sainsbury's and just clear them out of their turnovers, because in the book John mentions cherry turnovers as like a specific thing. So I was like, well, maybe they've got, and I think he said the pastry was like gluten depleted or something, and there's something about the way they're absorbed. So I was like, right, that's what I need. And this guy who worked at Sainsbury's told me that on certain days of the week, which were those incidentally my training days, he was having to defrost more of those pastries because that's what I was doing as part of my evening high carb.
So he adapted to your schedule because of the immense demand of apple turnovers.
Yeah.
So I had a similar experience it was in the same phase, going home after the gym via KFC every day to get the Royal Banquet box.
You're in the Colonel Club, weren't you?
I was fully in the Colonel Club. And then after my KFC, I'd have a shake, which was recommended by the protocol at the time, which was 100 grams of dextrose, 100 grams of sugar, with 50 grams of whey, hydrolyzed whey. Yeah, which is tastes of vomit. Like it has the same, it's been hydrolyzed, which is what your stomach does to protein. So it actually has the same consistency and taste of vomit. And caffeine post-workout, so 6 p.m., 1 to 200 milligrams of caffeine. And it was a really like sludgy, I think I just used coffee rather than caffeine. So like instant coffee in with it. And it was just it was a drink that just made you feel a bit dirty for the next couple of hours.
Well, when you think like, what could I have this evening to sort of wind me down for the night? It's not 100 grams of sugar and 200 milligrams of caffeine, is it? Like that tends not to feature in sort of an evening routine, but it did for us because of insulin, essentially. So
that was our carbohydrate journey in a nutshell. The next step was thinking, is it to do with what time you eat your meals in general? So then we got hooked onto the idea of, is it about you have to eat breakfast every morning? As Dr. Kellogg says, most important meal of the day.
So around this time, Martin Burkhan wrote his first article on Elite FTS. I can still remember reading it. I can remember where I was when I read it. And the reason that I gave it so much attention was because of how unbelievably lean Martin Burkhan was, presumably always will be. And so we'd come out of this phase of like, well, you've always got to eat breakfast, right? And even in all the low carb approaches, the high carb approaches, carb backloading, obviously eating all your carbs in the morning, they all involved having sort of 3 to 4 meals a day, and getting a certain amount of protein in each meal, and worrying about the time between each meal and all that sort of stuff. The sort of stereotype of a bodybuilder carrying Tupperware around to not miss their eating schedule. And then Martin Burkhan came out and went like, well, I don't have breakfast. I eat a little bit at midday and then I have a massive meal after training and I just eat whatever I want. And I'm like, what?
And he'd just sign off all of his articles with that picture. Do you remember?
Yeah. He was shredded.
Damn it.
Absolutely shredded. If you've not heard of Martin Burkhan and lean gains, look him up on his social media. Some of his before and after photos are insane. So yeah, we went down that route of fasting for a period of time. And I think that looking at it, it started out really sensibly. So it started out as what is now actually probably a lot of people are familiar with, which is the 16 schedule. So you fast for 16 hours, which basically works out as like you stop eating at 8 p.m. on the evening, and then you don't eat again until midday the following day, and then you eat for 8 hours, so 16-8. It started out like that. And then you start reading more and more about fasting and more about all these other hormones like IGF-1 and all this other stuff that can happen when you fast, and how you influence all these other things, and cortisol that might be assisting in fat loss and might be assisting in muscle gain. And you think, well, I wonder what would happen if I fasted for 24 hours instead of 16.
And you go, what about 36 hours? And as you can probably tell from listening to us, that we are a dangerous combination of relentlessly curious and quite masochistic.
Yeah. I think if there's a hint of like this might be the thing, we're happy to go through fairly major levels of inconvenience and discomfort. So this led to 12 weeks of, I think, like, if we're being honest, the 16-8, like following lean gains, it's very sensible, really. It's actually very convenient, and skipping breakfast and then having more food in the evening suited our schedule at the time, which was we were students, and you tend to have more social stuff in the evening. But then we thought, no, let's try just not eating every other day. So alternate day fasting was actually a bit of a thing at the time. So it is literally, as the name suggests, every other day, no calories. Or I think you were allowed, I think I used to have like glutamine in water with like lemon slices. Does that ring a bell for you?
Yeah, there was always some fasting drink that you're supposed to have, but the crux of it was 12-hour eating window, 36-hour fast, 12-hour and that again sounds like it's funnily enough, the hard part is the eating, it's not the fasting.
Yeah. So I can remember Yusuf staying over, like the flat I was in at uni at the time, and the guy one of my flatmates, because obviously we'd started propane at the time, so we were seen as we were the fitness experts. And Yusuf arrived, and we'd lined up our eating window, so it was going to be the same day. And I remember you producing for breakfast a pizza and a entire jug of orange juice.
And a cheesecake.
A cheesecake. And Dom just sort of watching it all, just going like, I can't put two and two together here. Like, this is not what fitness is. But even with that approach, we'd still struggle to hit because you had to basically have like almost 2 days worth of calories in you to still hit your deficit.
Well, we were doing more at the time. I think we were doing 10,000 calories on the eating days.
Were we? Oh my god!
And so you'd go shopping the night before on the fast, and obviously that's when you're at your most hungry. And we've all experienced eyes bigger than stomach, so you go into Tesco and you buy the big tub of a couple of boxes of cereal, a few boxes of pastries, a pizza, some packs of noodles, just things that are really calorie dense and that you can just nail. But multi-pack of crisps, all that stuff, and that's like, okay, I've got my breakfast sorted for tomorrow.
I remember because Chris tried this for a while. Chris from Modern Wisdom fame, and I remember he sent me a text for what we were both on like our shopping trip at the same time, because obviously like we all did this like evening, what can I eat tomorrow trip, and Chris just sent me a photo of a birthday cake, an entire birthday cake, and said like, will this be okay for tomorrow? It's like, Chris, like a cake's fine, but why get a birthday cake? And he's like, well, I like parties and birthdays are parties, so I want to have a birthday cake. So I think he had an entire birthday cake on one of his... I think
you've both got an incredible skill of being able to just put away something like that. Like Chris's typical meal is a saurine malt loaf dipped into a litre of yogurt and just put away. I've seen you destroy 2 or 3 sandwiches within minutes. Yeah.
Alternate day fasting was very, very suited to me, actually. I don't think it's a very healthy way of living. Like, it's a very, you either spend all day very hungry, very on edge, but also weirdly quite productive at the same time, because you've just taken out like hours of your day. Like, there's nothing to prepare, nothing to eat, nothing to clean up. But then every other day is so centered around food, all
really
night.
good way to fully destabilize the normal sense of eating food and creating a feast and famine mindset to any meal, and a sense of severe judgment when you see people. I remember you sent me a message of sat in the library and you were like, I'm looking at this girl next to me like eating every day, what a twat.
Yeah, like what sort of strategy is that? That's never going to work. Eating calories every single day. Yeah, not good. Not good. Interesting experiment, but I think we did it for 12 weeks and actually continued making progress and got decently lean. But I don't think that was anything to do with the fasting window. I think it was just to do with the fact that we continued training throughout. Training on a fasting day was always an experience, though. It was an interesting one.
It was. So then, following this episode of alternate day fasting, we got into Dave Asprey, who recommends 50 grams of yak butter blended into your coffee in the mornings as a booster for fat loss. So he says that the metabolic boost that you get from that is so powerful that it exceeds the calories that you've got from the 50 grams of butter, and that it's a massive nootropic, it's a cognitive enhancer, it's kind of the cure for all
Everything.
ailments.
Yeah. I think it's a step beyond that, isn't it? Because I remember Kerrygold butter specifically. So he was very keen on it being grass-fed, because that's where we got into the grass-fed bullshit. So it had to be grass-fed butter, grass-fed unsalted Kerrygold butter with MCT oil blended into coffee that had to be a specific type of coffee, because normal coffee is just full of mold and damages your brain. Mycotoxins. So like you had to buy his coffee, which somehow miraculously, Kenko can't manage it, Nescafe can't manage it, but Dave Asprey's cracked how to not get mold in his coffee. You have to buy his coffee beans, have those coffee beans and whisk it all together. And I had a couple of instances of like trying to do this in a, like a NutriBullet thing. And if you put hot liquid into one of those blenders with stuff that is initially solid and then becomes fluid, it tends to go everywhere from experience. So you suddenly just have like hot fat all over the kitchen.
Sounds really unsafe. Goodness me. So we did that for a while. That was our morning thing. I was in Scotland and I couldn't find Kerrygold butter in the local shops, so I just had to use salted Anchor butter, which I emailed the Anchor team and they assured me that the cows were grass fed.
Really?
Yeah. And so I had this salty coffee in the mornings, and this was during the period of our final exams for our degree. So we were both going into our exam periods having just had butter in the morning, and looking at people around in the exam hall drinking orange juice, thinking, oh, what an idiot, what's that going to do for their cognitive
He's going to fail that exam. Cool.
Oh.
I remember having just spooning in the morning for my breakfast. I would just have a spoon of grass-fed butter for the fats for my brain, Unbelievable, really, looking back. But you're just so convinced at the time. Like, I remember being absolutely certain that this was the thing to do. And that, I think for a while we got into like just general food quality, because we were worried about all the fat we had, all the dairy we had, being grass-fed beef. Do you remember that stuff? Grass-fed eggs.
Yeah,
grass-fed
I remember
eggs.
subscribing.
It's not grass. It's definitely not grass-fed. Is it? No, surely not. What's the stuff that? What quality do eggs have to have? Corn-fed?
I think it was certain criteria about, the chicken has to be massaged in a certain way and facing the sun for this many hours of the day. I remember subscribing to a Jewish butcher online because of the specific meat quality that they had. And
God.
So
yeah, I signed up to like a monthly meat it was called Athlete. I think it might still exist. It was like pre-muscle food, because they had grass-fed like beef burgers that were gluten-free, which was a big deal, because we also went through that phase as well around the same time, avoiding gluten.
Because that's the reason, that's the thing that's killing your progress.
Because didn't you do an experiment where you cut out gluten for 30 days and then had like a loaf of bread or something like that? Is that right?
Yeah, I had a bunch of pasta and had the bloat, the rebound bloat.
Unsurprisingly.
Yeah, I was at least 8 months pregnant. It was pretty bad. So the other things that we've done, and I just think this deserves an honourable mention, is a structured supplement diet called the V diet that Johnny did a few years back.
I don't think I did it. I gave it a jolly good go, but I didn't do it. So this actually preceded probably all the stories we were mentioning. So T Nation is also a supplement company. They own a supplement brand called Biotest, or maybe Biotest owned T Nation. I don't know which way around it is. But one of the diets that they really pushed at the time was called the V diet, or the Velocity diet, which essentially is 6 days of the week you have 4 protein shakes a day. And I think you can have like peanut butter in one of them. I have a nut allergy, so I can't have that. You had to have like superfood in it. And then once a week, you get one on the evening, you do 3 protein shakes and you get 1 solid meal for the week. So essentially, and you're supposed to do it for 28 days. Essentially, it is an extremely low calorie. It's like a protein sparing modified fast. It's the term it was given. And that's a diet used in other ways as well, not just attributed to T Nation. So I thought, well, that looks good, because everyone's like, oh, you just do 28 days and then you shred it. And I was like, well, that sounds great. Like, I can do 28 days and being shredded's nice. So you try and get the Biotest supplements, but they were only in the US at the time. They were super expensive. It was going to be like the thick end of $1,000 to do 28 days of protein powder. And I was like, well, I'm not paying that. So I found equivalents on my protein, but it had to be casein, and it had to be micellar casein, because that's the magical protein that makes it work, which tastes awful, or at least it did at the time. I'm sure my protein have improved it since then. And I was told by the moderators at T Nation that the diet that I was going to do wouldn't work because I wasn't using their supplement brand. And there's kind of like 2 funny stories that have stuck around since it happened. So the first one was morning 1 of doing it. You go downstairs to make your first protein shake. And I had there's so many things to sort of prepare and get in the shake to make sure that there was like fiber, there was the superfood, there was getting the right amount of protein in, blending it, making sure the water level was right. I was trying to follow the instructions carefully. So while I was doing that, I just ran the tap, threw everything in the shaker, weighed it all out, had the little set of sort of, the drug dealer set of scales, the micro scales, ran it under the tap, shaked it, and then shook it, and then drank it, and I'd used warm water. So aside from that being bad as it stands, the superfood powder that I was using had garlic in it. So it was Super Veg, for anyone who remembers. Super Veg XS, I think it was called, for my protein, which
Can
included
I just say
garlic.
that's an understatement to say it had garlic in it.
It was garlic. It was garlic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So warm. I mean, it was supposed to be chocolate flavor, but because it was micellar casein, it didn't really dissolve properly. So it was just like bitty granular protein, warm, and it tasted like garlic. So I decided to finish drinking it, was then subsequently sick, obviously, because it tasted like hot garlic at 8 a.m. And then you're like, well, that was £5 gone. So you think, like, do I have it again or not? So I decided to have my first solid meal for the week that evening. I was keeping a log on tnation.com at the time that Yusuf was reading. Persisted with it, got to day 2. And on day 2, my log entry in the morning was like, so I've decided, because I'm going to train today, I've decided I'm going to have week 2's solid meal. So I'm 2 days in, and I've had 2 meals and 3 protein shakes in each day, which is not what the Velocity diet is. And by the end of the final week, I think on the Friday of week 1, it got to like 10 a.m. and I just drove to McDonald's and just completely gave in.
What was it like when you had that first drink, thinking, this is what all of my meals is going to be like?
It's awful. It's awful, to be honest. I imagine it's what it feels like if you get sent to prison and the door closes behind you for the first time and you're in the cell. And you're like, here we go. It's just this now.
This is what it's going to be.
Yeah. It's awful.
I enjoyed reading the log because it was, hi guys, I'm Johnny. I'm doing the Velocity diet. Day 1 log. I've decided to have my meal of the week today. Day 2. Hi guys. I've trained today and I've decided to have next week's meal today. Day 3. Abort mission.
And then I just had loads of micellar casein.
That
Then
stuff
it took
is
me like a
brutal.
year and a half to finish.
So I've thrown up casein a lot because it's, as Johnny describes, the original version of it was, and this was when it was unflavoured, has the consistency of sand with a bit of, I guess, cement or concrete in it, that
Yeah.
you shake it. And as you shake it with the water, it becomes more and more solid until it becomes a solid lump that just bangs against the corners of the
Yeah.
shaker. Boom,
Slides
boom,
up and down
boom.
the shaker. Yeah.
Oh, awful.
I like the other day when I was training. So if anyone listens to us on Modern Wisdom, you've heard us talk about clear whey before from My Protein. The other day when I was training, I was drinking some of that, and I was just hit with this like appreciation for where supplements are now and
How far they've come.
Yeah.
Like, what a turnaround from the industry.
Yeah. So like we'll do a separate episode on supplements, but I can remember having making my own pre-workout blend that included is it arginine? Like pump enhancer. Do you remember that stuff?
Yeah, it tasted
I
awful.
think that is the worst tasting thing I've ever had in my life. Because it's just like drinking. If you imagine like going into the chemistry lab at school, turning off someone's Bunsen burner, grabbing the conical flask and just drinking whatever's in the conical flask. That's what L-arginine tastes like. All in the name of getting lean and muscly.
Yeah. Goodness me. So really, today we've just scratched the surface. I'm glad that we've split out these videos because we thought we'd get through it all. We've got through maybe a quarter of the stupid mistakes that we've made in the past. We've not even touched on the time that we both got Pancreas-lean and it started to genuinely affect our brains to the point where we were so food focused. I remember, like I basically gave myself a eating disorder, and if it wasn't for our coach Eric Helms to systematically drag us out of it, would have been deep in the throes of it. Really gives you an appreciation for what it's like. I remember looking at a box of tissues and I'd hit my calories for the day and I was thinking, oh, I bet they've got no calories in. I bet it'd be quite filling. And I had to stop myself thinking, no, it's probably not good for you to eat tissues.
Well, it's when you're just craving like mechanical fullness, isn't
Just
it?
the chronic hunger, this depth of
that just
void
can't
inside
be
you.
satiated. Like I would go shopping and I would buy like my food for the week and I would buy myself a cucumber. And as soon as I got out the shop, I would desperately like open the cucumber and just eat the whole cucumber, and it would be like it's like less than 100 calories in a full cucumber, but it's just water mainly, but it's just a little bit satiating. It's crazy what being that lean, being in a deficit for that length of time does to your mind and does to the way you perceive food. It's probably not something I'd recommend anybody try, to be honest. Pushing it that far, I don't think it's not worth it unless you're like your job depends on it, or you're doing competitive bodybuilding. But if it's just recreational for like looking good on holiday or something like that, absolutely not worth the cost.
If you've been that lean, you'll resonate fully with Johnny's cucumber story. If you haven't, you'll be like, what? That's such a weird... But
Yeah.
you just want to feel like you're eating something because it's so pervasive, this hunger. And interestingly, nobody's immune from it. In the Minnesota starvation experiment, where they took a bunch of conscientious objectors to the World War and they systematically starved them, they found that they all exhibited anorexic behaviors and anorexic thought patterns. So there is a biochemical change that happens when someone is underweight for long enough, and the only way to reverse it was to actually feed them back up again.
Yeah, they were on like, I don't know what it was like 800 calories a day or something for a sustained period of time, right? And they eventually lost a really high percentage of their body weight, and it just changes your personality almost.
It does.
Such a strange, so weird. But the trouble with dieting for that long and getting that lean is you would think like, oh well, I'll have loads of calories tomorrow and I'll be back to square one again. Like it'll reverse it, but it does take like probably half the time. So if you diet for 16 weeks, I think it'll take 8 weeks to get back to some semblance of like not just always thinking about the next meal the whole time, or not like worrying about how many grams of carbs you've got left for the evening,
There's
or
a picture.
whether tissues have got calories in.
Yeah. There's a picture of Homer Simpson where someone did a cross-section of his brain, and different amounts of his brain space are taken up by different things. And it's so true that so much of your mental bandwidth, like a really high proportion of it, maybe 70-80% of your total thoughts in the day, are focused on what am I going to eat next. So there it is for some of the diet mistakes that we've made. If you enjoyed this, we will be covering training mistakes, supplement mistakes, and some special mentions as well. You'll enjoy the special mentions, I promise.
That's just like everything else in life that we've done that was silly, right?
That was stupid, yeah.
In the name of trying to get better at stuff. All in the name of self-improvement. But I think we're also going to do a video where we talk about how to spot stuff like this, right? Because I think is that what we're doing?
That's what we're teeing up for.
Right.
What are the commonalities, and why is it that... How can we give you the tools to spot them early so you don't keep running into the brick wall headlong repeatedly like we did?
Because it's one thing to say like, oh yeah, all those things sound stupid, right? Like you listen to those stories and think, I wouldn't fall for any of them. Well, obviously, if any of them come back up again, you'll know. But none of those things at the time were like, yeah, they're weird initially. Like the butter and coffee thing was weird initially, but then it gets such acceptance, and so many people start doing it, and so many people start talking about it.
Oh,
so
the
many
hype.
people, yeah,
It just makes it irresistible.
yeah,
You think,
and science starts getting wrapped around it to justify it. People who you think like, well, they sound really intelligent, they're talking about it, and it does actually, in the way they explain it, it makes sense, right? So
it's a big reason
easy.
why I did a medical degree.
Just because we just couldn't get our heads around insulin, because all these things were insulin based. But so it's easy to look back now and go, well, that's stupid, I wouldn't fall for that. But these things exist now, just in different forms. And I think it is important to, like, they all have certain characteristics, and they all follow the same pattern and the same arc of being popular and then falling out of fashion and then coming back into fashion again in the future. So we'll be covering how to spot things to avoid the frustrating 10 years that we had going through all of this stuff.
100%. So don't think that you're not safe. There we go.
Don't think that you're not safe. Don't think you're safe.
Don't think that you're immune from these tricks.
You are not safe.
You are not safe.